This recording may contain content unsuitable for children.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Dungeoncast. I'm Will.
And I'm Brian.
This is the podcast where we talk about everything Dungeons and Dragons, from blind beggars to behemoth barbarians. And today, we're taking a trip to the Feywild.
Prepare yourselves.
I cast Fireball. The Dungeoncast.
Will,
Yes.
paint me a word picture. Take me to the Feywild.
Take you to a faraway place.
Take me to the faraway Feywilds.
I'll do my best. Now, when it comes to the Feywild, you and the rest of you players in my game have a little bit of experience.
A little bit too much, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, I think most people who have experience with the Fey think that.
That's what Rowan thinks. I had fun.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Before we delve deep into the rich topic that is the Fey and the Feywild, let's talk a little bit about what your take on it is, just from your experience with the Fey.
Okay.
Because you guys have dealt with a few tricky things that are Fey of origin.
Yeah, tricky is a good word for it. Yeah. You try to do your normal checks and nothing's working, and you're like, what the fuck is going on here?
Right.
And it's that patented hashtag Fey bullshit.
Right.
So yeah, it's weird in there, man. Like the things that you think are good and right, and the good courses of action to take can like get thrown on their head. Yeah. The creatures there are like real mischievous and crazy, and sometimes very, very dangerous. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad that the Fey is mostly contained, even though it seems like it's kind of starting to like spread its tentacles out.
We'll talk about that, because we'll talk about like what the classical relationship with the Fey and the prime material plane is, and also like the small slight differences in like my world, because in character and out of character, you probably don't have a good grasp on how that all works.
Yeah, it was real confusing. A lot of wisdom checks, illusions and stuff to break through, or to trial and error through, more like how we did. Kind of just clunkered through it all and took it. Okay. A lot of damage die going on in that place.
Yeah, you guys had a lot of trouble.
But I really liked some of the things that happened. Like, is blue fire generally like something that is
Fey
of the Fey
origin?
Yeah.
I mean, kind of. I mean, I've seen it, and that's where I got my idea. Mostly the will-o-wisp is a creature, which, though it's considered undead, it's also classically tied to the Fey, and it usually burns blue. Like that's pretty classical. I've also seen. I think I was playing. What was it? Dragon Age, and they have. There's a blue type of fire that's tied to not exactly the Fey, but like I guess you could call it equivalent in that game, called the Fade, which it's actually more tied to like demons and whatnot. But it runs very reminiscent to me when I was playing the game, especially how it has to do with dreams and whatnot. But I'm going to be honest, I don't know that much about Dragon Age lore, so I don't want to talk too much on something I don't know.
We're talking about D&D right now.
We're talking about D&D.
When you go to the Feywilds, you don't really have to try too hard to get there necessarily.
Depending on where you are, and depending on how you get there.
It was someplace we could walk into.
Because of where you were, and we'll talk about that. So basically, actually, from what you've just said right now, and like your take on the Fae, it makes me feel actually kind of happy, because I was like, okay, I did a good job of portraying the Fae, which is something that I always worry about when trying to portray something that is so difficult for humans to understand.
Yeah,
like, am I even doing this right?
How do I describe this in otherworldly thing that doesn't exist?
Right.
Like, and is so foreign and far removed from reality.
Exactly.
How do I make my players relate? Yeah, I get you.
Cool. Okay, so just for clarification for our viewers and listeners, this episode is going to be mostly about the Feywild as a place, as a plane of existence in the world, in the mythos of D&D, and in the world of your campaign.
And it's natural fantasy setting.
Yeah, and of course we're going to talk about variations I've personally seen on like Fey type places, domains, if you will. And of course, we're going to talk about the inhabitants. We're going to touch on Fey creatures and the types of things that live there. But we're not going to be delving too deep into the lore and ideas behind things like Archfey and like the way like maybe the societies necessarily work in the Feywild, because I want to reserve that for an episode where we talk strictly about the things that live in the Fey, like a monster mythos episode about the Fey, and then later on we might do more individual episodes on things like Eladrin or things like Fomorians and other like specific creatures that live in the Fey. But today we're going to focus on the place. So, in classic vanilla D&D lore, the way it works is the main world in which like everything usually happens, in which the humans and the halflings and the dwarves and all of them live, is called the prime material plane. It's just the prime main area where mortals live. And there are planes that surround the prime material plane, and there are like planes like the positive planes, like the astral sea, where like gods and deities technically make their realm. And then, of course, there's the negative planes like the abyss and the nine hells, where demons and devils and maybe even evil deities make
Things
their
like
realm.
in the Hades.
Yeah, Hades. Yeah. That's actually one of the realms. Excuse me.
Nice.
And like there's just a plethora of realms or planes, if you will. With
is that
all
like
kinds
the
of different
Shadowfell?
things. There's a shadow, which let me get to that. You have these outer planes, and of course we've talked a little bit about beyond those outer planes. There's the far realm, but really, really close to the prime material plane, there are these realms, these two realms, which are considered reflections of the prime material plane. Now, the lore of how these reflections were made varies a little from edition to edition.
Okay.
But the basic understanding I have is that the Feywild and the Shadowfell are two extreme reflections of the prime material plane, where when the prime material was being made in the beginning creation story, there were parts of material and magics and whatnot that were either too bright and powerful and magical, or too grim and dark and shadowy to make it into the actual object that is the prime material plane.
Okay,
and those
too extreme
in either direction, and those bits and pieces, if you will, coalesced into their own dark or light reflections of the prime material plane. And the Feywild would be the light one, if you will, the bits that were too magical, too saturated in color, if you will, too colorful, too crazy and wild, and out of control.
It's safe to say too chaotic,
too chaotic. Yeah, I would say definitely chaotic is definitely an aspect of the Feywild. Although there is a certain law and order, if you will, it makes such little sense to normal human minds that like it might as well be chaos in a way.
Yeah, but they do have their own Fey code or understanding.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Almost like a brotherhood of their own uniqueness.
Kinda, yeah. In the Monster Mythos in the Monster Mythos episode, we will get more into the blue-orange morality that is the Fey morality, and we'll also talk about like Seelie versus unseelie Fey, which you probably don't know anything about.
No, we talked a little bit about that in the campaign. So.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, we did. I forgot because you guys got attacked by Darklings, and I had to kind of like talk about how these weren't the same. And
somebody did a pretty good check, and
that was it. Oh yeah, Thanik, of course. You know, he's a smart one,
smart boy.
I
miss Thanik.
I know, it's been a while since we played. So that's how the Feywild and Shadowfell, the creation mythos goes. That they're a reflection of the prime material plane, and the way that's described in the Dungeon Master's Guide is that geographically, the Feywild and the prime material plane match to a certain extent. A mountain in the prime material plane might be a beautiful like snow-capped peak with like a crystal pillar on it the size of a skyscraper. Well, like a lush and lively forest in the prime material plane might be a deep and magical jungle on the Fey wild side of things.
Okay.
And the way that one usually would cross between the Feywild and the prime material plane is there are certain points called Fey crossings.
Okay.
And the way those work is there are certain points in either world that are so closely resemblant of each other that they start to kind of cross over.
Things get thin and they're relatable enough where you can stand there.
Exactly. And because of that, some of these Fey crossings are really sensitive. So that like it could be as simple as someone pushing a boulder over makes it different enough that the Fey crossing doesn't exist anymore. On either side.
That can be troubling.
That could be troubling, yeah, absolutely.
Getting trapped in the Feywild.
A lot of times,
not neat, but neat. Cool.
Right. A lot of times these Fey crossings are sensitive to time, because maybe the resemblance between the two areas isn't necessarily exact enough, except for at twilight the light hits it just right and suddenly there's a Fey crossing. Or maybe
that's fun.
At night under a full moon, or at night under no moon, or there's always like
during the equinox, when the planets align.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's actually a lot of that when it comes to the Fey, and it's usually tied to the stars and the moon.
It seems very spiritual place.
It's a very magical place. Magic is inherent in the Feywild. Magic is more potent, more chaotic, more unpredictable, and
more familiar to the beings that live there.
More familiar to the beings that live there. They things like gnomes and Eladrin and elves, like they live and breathe magic. Magic is their life's blood. Like versus in the prime material plane, you got to fight a little bit harder, know a little bit more, maybe know some of the right people to kind of get that same access to magic. And I like to actually I guess role play that in my games, where if you guys are in a Fey touch place or in the Feywild and one of you guys is a arcane magic user, I might have a random magic table that I roll whenever that person does a spell, or maybe if they crit, I make some sort of extra effect. But I like there to be a little bit of an unpredictability to the use of magic when
some response
in an area like
of
that.
The area,
yeah,
like reverberation of like, oh, there's magic here, and it's going to trigger other magics.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Now, the general rule for the Feywild in comparison to the prime material plane is it's like the regular world dialed to 11. Like it's the color saturation is way higher.
Yeah.
The plant life way lusher. Like I just said, and the magic is way more potent and powerful.
Is the Fey always foresty? I always get a picture of it being like very natural and like no structures and foresty.
Traditionally, yeah, it's going to be mostly foresty and maybe jungly. There is a Underdark version in the Feywild called the Feydark, which is very reminiscent to the Underdark in the prime material plane, but it's more there's more like glowing crystals and maybe magical mists in the air, and like it's just again the Underdark dialed to 11 when it comes to magic and nature.
Cool.
But I've seen iterations of the Feywild where there are areas that have nothing to do with forest. There's lots of lore when it comes to like winter Fey and like just whole Arctic tundras and whatnot.
Oh, what? Which not like the Fey has like seasons that like there's a separate place with just like it's like more snowy all the time. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to it later in this episode. But there are variations on the Fey that I like a lot, and I want to talk about the variations on how people portray the Feywild.
Okay.
But in vanilla D&D, the way the Feywild is traditionally portrayed is it's a lot of greenery, a lot of magic, mostly forest and nature. There's a Feydark, and it's perpetually twilight, and that never changes.
That's cool.
It is cool. That's not how I portray my Feywild, and it's not how I've seen some other people do it, but we'll talk about that
How
later.
do you portray your Fey?
My Feywild is more chaotic. I have a day and night sequence like normal, but I also have like there are certain areas of the Fey that are in perpetual season. Because in my Feywild I have Archfey who are sovereigns over the seasons.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, that's
pretty cool.
I think so. And also I like some concepts from The Name of the Wind, where Kvoth, when he goes to the Fey, he finds that as he goes in certain directions, time changes. While where he was perpetually twilight, and when he ventures like X amount of distance to the east, it starts to just become nightfall randomly. Versus in a different direction, it becomes daytime. And I've seen, and it's not just The Name of the Wind that I've seen that. I've seen that in some other.
And that's Studio Ghibli, right? Is that Name of the Wind?
No, Name of the Wind is a book by Patrick Rothfuss. So he's my favorite author in the world. He's only written 2 books, but they're amazing, and it's part of the trilogy called the King Killer Chronicles. I highly recommend it to anyone who likes fantasy literature. I think it's just amazing writing. Patrick Rothfuss is a fucking wizard with words.
Yeah.
So those are some variations, but the vanilla is that the Feywild is perpetually twilight, and There is another thing in the vanilla lore of the Feywild, and I like this. And this comes from like old school mythology when it comes to things that are Fey, and it's called, I think it's called like time distortion.
Okay.
Basically, those that visit the Fey will experience everything normally, but upon returning to the mortal realm, they are going to have to make a save for two things. I think they make a save for one thing, and the DM is going to roll for another thing. The thing that they're going to try and save against is their memories of being in the Fey.
Oh.
There's going to be some time distortion for them. They might not remember things at all. They might forget all the time they spent in the Feywild.
Oh,
they remember going in, they remember coming out, they don't remember what happened.
They don't know how they got these scratches on their arms.
They don't know, or these cool items that they stole, or who knows what else. So there's that, but there's also actual time distortion that can occur.
Like how much time lapsed versus where you were and where
maybe
you're
you were
coming back
gone
to.
for minutes, but you come back, it's been 3 years. Maybe you were gone for 5 years and you come back and it's been an hour.
That's extreme. I was
It is
thinking like
extreme.
days, weeks.
And it can be anywhere in between that
Right.
too, but
Oh,
it
yeah.
can be very extreme. In the Name of the Wind, when Kvothe goes to the Fae, he is gone for I think a year and a half, and he comes back 3 hours later or something like that. Yes, it's pretty crazy.
Hyperbolic time chamber.
Pretty much. There we go. Yeah, that's a good equivalent.
I saw you yesterday. How did you level twice?
I know. Now I'm Super Saiyan 2. So yeah, and that's the basics of vanilla D&D lore when it comes to the Feywild. But for variations, a lot of variations go back to the mythology and lore we have that the Feywild's based off of. The Feywild and all things that are Fey come from like old Celtic, Scottish, Irish, English, and just general Western European mythology. And the Fey was kind of like their equivalent of like the supernatural or the spirits of nature. And fairies, which were the sole inhabitants of the Fey, were very mischievous and mysterious and mystical beings that were very dangerous and unpredictable.
Right.
And
okay.
again, they had that blue-orange morality, which we'll get to in another episode, which just made it so you didn't want to deal with them at all.
Yeah.
And it's actually in a lot of those stories
Very
that
foreign feelings from these creatures.
Yeah, very much so. And it's in a lot of these stories that you get a lot of the things that you see now in D&D, like the time dilation and the memory loss and stuff like that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's actually really cool stuff to read about. I highly recommend go checking it out.
Sweet
if you're DMing
to mess
a game,
with your players.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And some of it is like really dark stuff. Like there's the mythology of what's called the changeling, in which a human baby is stolen from its crib by a Fey creature and replaced by a Fey baby that looks identical. And the humans that raise their child don't know it till it's too late, but the child grows up into some Fey creature and then runs off one day, and then they've lost their child.
Isn't that like the hag?
The hag does that. Yeah, that's one of the things that does
creepy.
that, but the hag does that. Yeah.
Like you just raise this kid and they're like, okay, thanks, bye.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the hag specifically, because hags are evil.
Yeah.
And
well, they're raising another hag.
They're raising another hag
Yeah.
that looks normal until I believe it reaches puberty or something like that, and then it becomes a hag.
Yeah.
But there is no raising that child. Well, not in the normal lore, there is no raising that child to be good.
Okay.
That child is inherently evil, and when it turns hag, it's over.
Yeah, it's a hag now.
It's a hag now. Like, and
gonna go
your
be a
child's
hag.
been God this whole time.
Yeah.
And
they eat it, right?
I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, probably.
So maybe something weird.
It reminds me of the movie that I saw a year or two ago called The Witch.
Okay.
In which the baby was stolen at the beginning of the horror movie, and yes, that baby was killed, and it was very gruesome looking, and it was really nasty. It was a really dark horror movie. And again, like even like those stories of witches and whatnot, that all you can kind of see it goes back further to Celtic mythology with babies being stolen.
Right.
And I was reading some actually really sad things, but I won't get into now, as maybe why those stories started to crop up. But needless to say, there are other stories as well where like Fey creatures try and woo men or women and seduce them or make deals. That's another big one with Fey creatures. They like to make deals, and like it's usually the moral of the story is they shouldn't have made the deal, and like this is how it all went wrong.
Like making a deal with a dragon.
Yeah, kind of. Except for I way rather make a deal with a dragon, like any day. Of
Oh,
the
yeah?
week. Oh yeah, 100%. Because a dragon will likely keep its word. Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of chaotic evil dragons, but like at least you can kind of understand the mentality behind a dragon. Like the Fey creature, you got no idea.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Okay, so when it comes to the Feywild, and the creatures that live there, the Fey Inhabitants, they are kind of divided into two major categories.
Okay.
Seelie and unseelie.
Right.
Now, the Seelie Court and the unseelie Court are both a categorization, but they're also a place. Theoretically, like they don't have to be. You don't have to run your Feywild like that. I'm going to be honest, I actually don't. But generally speaking, the ruler of the Seelie Fey, which are kind of they're considered the good ones.
Okay.
I ended up looking up and seeing that the word Seelie is an old Middle English word, which means happy, lucky, mischievous, and stuff like that. And it's actually what became the word silly nowadays.
Okay, cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So still under the Fey bullshit, but you'd rather hang out with those guys.
You'd probably rather deal with them.
Right.
And on the surface, they're also, they tend to be more beautiful and more good looking. They're the classic fairies that you probably are used to in today's modern culture, like Tinkerbell probably would be a Seelie Fey. And they're ruled over by the Queen of Fairies, whose name varies from mythos to mythos, but I think classically she's known as Titania.
Okay.
And I believe her husband is Oberon. And they are very noble and proud Fae, and generally
they're on the level of a god, though, right?
Not quite. Like
Close.
Titania and Oberon are what you would consider to be archfey, and so they're powerful enough that a warlock may make a deal with them and siphon power from them.
Okay.
So they're more powerful than a level 20 character, because a level 20 warlock is still siphoning power from them.
Right. Got it.
So they're like on demigod level kind of deal.
More like a spiritual presence that like kind of rules over the Fae. Bit.
Yeah. But at the same time, they do have a physical appearance, and like they have a place. There is a throne.
You can go
crystal throne.
You can go there and touch them.
Yes.
Like theoretically.
I mean, well, they'll kill you, but yeah. and again, like with the Seelie Fays, like they're considered good. They're a nightmare to deal with, and they have their own rules that like you'll never understand, and you might not get right, and that might get you killed. Because you showed up and you didn't make the right gesture. Like if you don't show up with the right kind of gift, you'll probably get killed on the spot.
Yeah, they'll take it as disrespect.
Yeah, and these beings aren't necessarily evil, even though like you would consider that pretty damn evil.
Yeah, they're acting on their morality.
Because what you did was considered evil.
Oh, okay.
In its own kind of way.
you.
I know. So things like elves and Eladrin, they would kind of fall on that side of the Seelie Fae, although elves aren't actually Fae, they just have Fae ancestry. Same with gnomes. Things like Satyr probably err more on the side of the Seelie Fae than on the unseelie Fae.
Okay.
Dryads, the same kind of deal. Sprites and pixies and whatnot.
If you're finding like, I guess when you're finding creatures like that, you can bank that you're in the Fae, or can you find creatures like that outside of the realm that is the Fae?
You can find them outside, but it's way, way rarer. And usually the reason you're finding them outside is because it's really close to a Fae crossing.
Yeah, reality is rubbing together somewhere.
Exactly.
Okay.
On the other side of things are the unseelie Fae, ruled by a queen called the Queen of Air and Darkness, who is very scary but very beautiful. Not necessarily evil, but the unseelie Fae are on the more grotesque side of things.
Okay.
Goblins kind of fall on that side, and goblins are very traditionally Fae.
Okay, I didn't know that.
I would point towards the movie Labyrinth is actually a good example of them being Fae-esque, where David Bowie plays the Goblin King.
Yeah.
He's got all those goblin people, and it's a very Fae-esque world that the protagonist ends up kind of having to explore.
Very strange shit going on.
Yes.
David Bowie.
David Bowie is a Fey creature.
R.I.P. David Bowie.
He was a Fey creature for all those of you who did not know that. So things like Fomorians, which are like really grotesque looking giant creatures that live in the Fey Dark, fairies that happen to be dark or evil-ish would fall into unseelie. Maybe what were they called? I think they're called blights. They're like corrupt tree type creatures. They could be maybe considered unseelie. Maybe
is that like
even
a treant?
A shambling mound. No, they're like tree-like humanoid-looking things made of vines and branches and whatnot. They're usually evil. They're not necessarily Fey, but like they kind of have ties to Fey.
They might make their home in the Fey.
They might make their home in the Fey.
Like the mound.
Might be a huge population of them in the Fey, made by maybe a dark wizard of some sort.
I like the Shambling Mound a lot, by the way. That's probably
it's a
one
cool
of my
creature,
favorites.
Right? Again, that one's not traditionally Fey, but it's so Fey-like. I'm like, it's Fey in my world.
Yeah, man, that was. I like how they suck stuff up. I like almost like the gelatinous cube. How that's like sucking stuff up.
Yeah.
Those creatures are pretty cool.
They're just fun. There's just something fun about them because they feel less like a malevolent monster, more like a force of nature.
Yeah, anything that can suffocate you.
Yeah,
pretty much is like that makes the fight really real.
Yeah, because it's like, oh shit, like I could drown or I could stop breathing or be crushed.
Thinking of the Shambling Mound is making me remember how much damage my character took. Maybe we should take a short rest.
I think that sounds like
Roll
a good
some
idea.
Hit die.
Let's do it.
All right. Hey everybody, we want to take this opportunity to thank you all for listening and watching. As always, we really appreciate it. But before we get into talking about how you can find us and our stuff, we wanted to talk about a podcast. Will, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, the podcast we want to talk about is a really cool one, which I've become quite a big fan of, called The Stubborn Heroes. It's a very, in my experience, it's a very funny adventure, which I get a lot of laughs out of, where a group of 4 guys get around in a table and just play the game, and it's a load of fun. We got a soundbite from them. Check it out.
Yeah, I know you guys are listening to are looking for a lot of live game stuff out there, so go ahead and listen to this.
Hey everybody, my name is Adam, and I host the D&D 5th edition podcast called The Stubborn Heroes. Here's a sample of the show.
I'm afraid an 11 persuasion is not going to persuade me. And it just sounds crazy to you.
What are you talking about again?
Oh, just forget about it. You would never understand.
You won't give me the glowing orb thing to play with? I can't play with any swords on the wall. This is no fun.
I will talk to a bird.
Hi! How are you? Hi!
Hello there, bird.
Hi there!
I am done with the game.
I am the being of 1,000 faces.
Well, that's a little bit creepy.
Then I'm just gonna pull out my bow and shoot an arrow right into his head.
Okay, what's more? No, what's more effective? I have a great sword. I'm gonna cut him right in half.
You can catch us on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Twitter, or any of your favorite podcasting apps, all at Stubborn Heroes. Thanks for listening.
So yeah, to check out The Stubborn Heroes, you can find them on iTunes, on SoundCloud, or anywhere else podcasts can be found. You can also feel free to tweet them at Stubborn Heroes. I highly recommend it. Please go check it out.
As do I. As you probably know, you can find us on SoundCloud.com or anywhere you can get podcasts, but we really need people to get on iTunes, start leaving us ratings and reviews. I know a lot of you listen on iTunes, and that would be a great help to us. You can also find us on Twitter at the Dungeoncast. And we're getting real close to our YouTube goal here, Will.
Yeah, we are. I suspect that probably sometime the week this episode airs, we will be announcing our winner of Volo's Guide, which to enter that, you had to be one of our first 100 subscribers who also left a comment, and which we will roll a die and see who wins.
Yeah, make sure you comment. You can subscribe but not comment, and that would be bad news. You wouldn't be technically entered. Make sure you comment. But we're at 98 subscribers as we're recording this, so by the time you're hearing it, hopefully it's too late. But if not, get on there. But it probably will be.
But yeah, if you want to support us here, if you want to hear more from us about all this crazy mumbo jumbo that is D&D, which we're loving doing this, by the way, we really need the support. We need the likes, we need the subscribes, and we need to get people talking about it, because that's how we're gonna grow, is word of mouth and the algorithms that are what YouTube is. So don't be selfish. Don't keep us to yourselves. Tell your friends. Okay, yeah.
Don't be that way. Be generous and tell your friends about us, because we want them to know, and we want as many people. We want to get just tell word of mouth.
Just tell everyone.
Tell everybody.
Tell them.
Tell your mom.
Okay. All right. Let's get back to the show.
I told my mom.
I think the short rest is over, Ryan.
Yeah. How many hit die did you use?
All of them. Let's go.
Oh, shit. Okay. Bye.
All right. right, Brian. So let's go back to the first thing you said to me at the beginning of this episode, because I actually feel now, thinking about it, that I didn't do such a great job as to painting that picture that you asked me to paint.
Well, I mean, I would rate the work you did, except you never did it.
Oh, geez. All right. Fair enough. So I want to paint a picture of the Feywild, because the Feywild is a very visual and beautiful place, and I feel like it deserves that. The Feywild is, again, kind of going back to what I said, it's the real world dialed to 11, and in a lot of the works that I've read that describe the Feywild or the Fey or something similar to it, everything just becomes more vibrant. Greens are greener, blues are bluer, water tastes sweeter. In The Name of the Wind, I believe, Quoth describes like the very air he breathes just fills him with life and exuberance. Magic just tinges the air. It's like you can just feel like an energy all around you. There are going to be beautiful, beautiful landscapes, like more beautiful than any artist could ever render through paint or digital means. There are going to be just crystals that like grow out of mountains, made of gemstones that don't exist in the regular material realm. Cities that are built by more civilized creatures like Eladrin are going to be much more intricate and expansive and made of crazy materials, and the architecture is going to be outlandish and magnificent. Everything's just dialed to 11. It's just out of this world, quite literally. And the beings that live there, we've talked a little bit about it, but kind of to get a little more into it, like things like centaurs are going to live there. Things like unicorns. Just the regular animals are going to be more magnificent in their own way. Like a horse that isn't a unicorn or a centaur from the Feywild might have a more luxurious mane and maybe be a little bit larger, or maybe run a little bit faster. Like there are things
jump
like that.
A little bit higher.
There are variations. Yeah, jump a little higher. There are variations of regular animals, like rather than dogs, there are creatures called blink dogs, which are wolf-like hounds that are also capable of inherent teleportation abilities.
Oh, like Misty Step?
Yeah, kind of like Misty Step.
Ooh.
Yeah, and there are creatures like displacer beasts, which are really grotesque, like emaciated-looking, like panther creatures with like really sharp angles but they're also really big. But they also have like weird tentacles that kind of grow out of their shoulders.
Oh my!
And they're deadly hunters. They're like panthers or lions or tigers, just like dialed to 11 on top of the grotesque tentacles and whatnot. The Feywild is a dangerous place because of creatures like this. It's a beautiful place. It's a crazy place.
Okay.
So that's the best.
I would.
That's my take on painting your fucking picture.
You've done real good, and I would say I would take my vacation there if I didn't know how fucked up it was.
Yeah, you would never want to take a vacation there. Besides, you might not even remember the vacation.
Yeah.
Well, that might be a good thing if it's a bad one, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
I hope time doesn't go by in the real world. Less time, like I'm in there for some days and I come out and it's only been some minutes. That would be a good vacation.
Yeah, that's your best scenario. The worst is you're gone for an hour and you come back and it's been 5 years.
5 years,
devastating.
Marty.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the inhabitants. Maybe we'll go a little bit more in depth, but I want to talk about some variations I've seen.
Okay.
One of which I use pretty regularly whenever I'm portraying a Feywild, and that's from a podcast I used to listen to so long ago called Critical Hit. That's probably still going. I haven't listened to that podcast in forever.
Check that out.
But they played 4th edition, and they had a really cool story arc where they go into the Feywild and whatnot. And one of the cool things that I took from Rodrigo, that was the name of the DM, Rodrigo, who's a really cool DM, he had this whole concept of the Feywild kind of being divided into 4 seasons, and each season had its own archfey or sovereign, which presided over not just the seasons in the Feywild, but they also had effect on the seasons in the real world. And these were completely made up by him, as far as I know. And he just had his own sovereigns for each. And I know that I was reading some old 4th edition lore on like archfey, and what I ended up doing for my world is I just took some of those archfey. I took a couple of them, reskinned them, and then made them my season sovereigns, if you will. And then I made up another one of my own, and then I took another one from like old Greek mythology. I took basically the god Pan, and then made him the archfey sovereign of spring, or no, summer. He was summer. Was he spring? No, he was summer.
Okay.
And
Pan's a pretty cool god. All the nature.
Yeah, nature. Plus, he's traditionally satyr, and satyrs are fey creatures in D&D.
Cool.
And so it just kind of all added up, made sense, and I kind of went with a whole. They not only presided over different aspects of the seasons, I also made them preside over other aspects of nature. Like Pan was specifically kind of like a patron deity, if you will, of like things like satyrs and centaurs and other beasts of the wood.
Okay.
Like, not to say he was the equivalent to the god of nature that I have in my world, but like he was an entity of nature.
Right. All right.
And this is just
that
one
presides
variation.
primarily over Fey.
Yeah, exactly.
So that would make it. That would make sense that it would be separate from the nature.
So I took that from Critical Hit, and I thought it was just a really cool variation on what is the Feywild. And I've seen there is a book series which I can't claim that I've read, but I've read the wiki on. And I'm trying to remember because I read this so long ago. It's a series called Aberrat.
Okay.
And it's definitely geared more towards young adults. I mean, if I had read this book that's why I never read it. Like, I didn't hear about the book till I was probably like 19, and I tried to read it, and I was like, this is cool, but it's not for me because I'm too old now.
Maybe down in the 13.
If I had read this when I was 13, though, this would have been my shit.
Okay.
But one of the super cool things that the author from that series kind of did with their alternate reality, because like it's a book series in which like a kid from our world ends up in a different magical world. It's not the Feywild, but like it's very reminiscent of Fey type things.
Kind of like Narnia.
Kind of like Narnia. Well, yeah, kind of like Narnia. Narnia, it definitely has some Fey aspects to it. Yeah. So you're right there. And the time dilation thing happens with Narnia. Yeah, there we go. That's actually a good point. But in the world of Aberrat, there is an actual physical map of the geography of the whole realm, if you will. But as you travel in different directions, time changes. Oh. And so in one city, the map
could change.
Huh?
So the map might change.
No, the map doesn't change. It's just time. Like, imagine if the time zones that everyone's in right now just stopped.
Okay.
And so, like, what time is it right now? 3 o'clock in the afternoon?
Yeah.
Imagine it's just in California, it's 3:40 forever.
And damn.
Yeah.
Oh, like how it's perpetually twilight.
Exactly. So, like, as you venture, I think it...
What a shitty time of day. You're always in traffic.
Well, I think the yeah, I know, right? The antagonist of that story, I think, was like the King of Midnight or whatever.
Okay.
I thought it was a really cool concept, and for me, that was the first time I'd seen it. But it's actually probably not the first time that's ever been done. I just think it's another cool variation. While a classic D&D says that the Feywild is supposedly constantly twilight, I like the idea of time being wonky like that.
Okay.
In different regards.
That's cool.
Trying to think of
how hard is it to keep track of that as a DM?
Very.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's very hard because it's like you got all these different rules
on
rolling
top
around
of
your
all
head.
the other things.
You
I
just
gotta
do the best you can.
Yeah.
But I love the Feywild. There's just something so enticingly mystical about it for me. It's just like I'm so glad you guys in the campaign went the route that you did, because I was like, cool, we're getting into some Fey shit now.
It was fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. I like the things that happened there. They were real like abstract and like difficult to deal with. Like,
right.
You don't go about problem solving in the Fey with conventional checks and means. It's always like some roundabout thing we had to do.
Right.
Which made things real. It made everybody like in character expand themselves and think in a way they normally wouldn't. So it
really did.
It brought a different feel to the game.
Yeah, I think the difficulties you guys went through with a lot of the Fey trials that you went through kind of brought the party closer together through your tribulations.
Yeah. We relied on everybody played a pretty major role in getting through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get back to inhabitants when it comes to the Feywild. So the most of the Feywild is exactly as the name implies, wild. It's untamed,
right?
Uncivilized, just untouched by man. But there are races that are inherently civilized that do make their homes there. Namely, gnomes is a big one.
Yeah, they're bringing some semblance of order to their community.
Yeah, absolutely. And elves do live there, but most elves have Fey ancestry and do not live there. They just are descendant of those who did used to live there,
What
which is
elves-
interesting to me because elves come from Nordic mythology and have nothing to do with Celtic mythology. But it actually meshes pretty well, if you ask me. I think it's pretty fitting. I don't know.
Would elves like living in the Fae? Is that why most wouldn't? Because it's kind of like dumb to be there.
I think that in 4th edition lore is kind of what I'm going back to in my head right now, and like a lot of elves left because they just liked it better in the Prime Material realm, and like those that stayed and those that left kind of diverged in their evolution, if you will. And there's a race from 4th edition which actually made it into the Player's Handbook numero uno, and it did not make it into the Player's Handbook of 5th edition, but it is an optional race in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and it's a variation on elves called Eladrin. Which are basically elves that stayed in the Fae and never left.
Okay, yeah, you dropped the name, and I was like, did we encounter that?
No,
I don't think we did.
We haven't. I thought about talking about it in the elves episode, but they're so different. We already had 3 sub-races to talk about.
I know, yeah.
That I was like, we'll probably do an Eladrin episode, and we probably will do an Eladrin episode. And if it's not enough to cover a full episode, maybe we'll fuse it with Shoutouts.
We could always throw it into the Monster Mythos one that we're going to do on Fae stuff too.
We could. My thought is like we might do a split episode where we talk about Eladrin and we talk about Shoutouts because they're very much equivalents of each other.
Okay, cool.
On opposite ends, but the Eladrin they look like elves, except for that their eyes are one color. They don't have like an iris or a pupil. It's just one solid orbicular color.
Like one palette.
Usually like green or gold or purple or blue.
Interesting, okay.
They're very fairy-esque looking. They're very much like high elves, so they're super into magic and they're really well-trained and they're really intelligent and whatnot. And just like high elves are super full of themselves. Their hair tends to be incredibly fair. Like it's very rare you'll see an Eladrin with like black hair. Okay. Usually it's silver or white or gray or blonde. Yeah, that's about it. Maybe blue. Yeah, okay. Maybe really light blue, super light green, something along those lines.
Gotcha.
And they make their home in incredibly elaborate and beautiful cities that they make arcanely in the Feywild.
Interesting.
Unlike wood elves, they're not super about living alongside nature. They dominate nature with their magic, and they make huge crystal palaces and crystal everything. They love crystals, so all the crystals. But yeah, so there's a lot of lore about Eladrin, but we'll get into that in another episode.
But they're in the Fae.
They're in the Fae. Satyrs are semi-civilized. They kind of roam from place to place in like traveling troops.
Okay, cool.
And for those of you who don't know what a satyr is, they're kind of like half goat, half men who are kind of super into drinking and seducing women.
If you've seen Hercules, you've seen
Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a satyr. He's definitely not a traditional satyr.
Do they all play the pan flute?
Yeah, generally speaking, they all play instruments, and they're just party animals. That's all they do.
Are they all sexually deviant?
They're super sexually deviant. That's kind of their thing. Yeah.
Neat.
Yeah. But again, things like unicorns and
get off me, you fucking satyr! And whatnot. Get off me! I said get off me.
That's gross. And also, there's no lady satyrs; are all men. So, anyways, do you have any questions about the Feywild? Like, what am I not covering here?
My only question is, can we stop talking about satyrs? Because I'm a little weirded out.
Yeah, we're moving on. No more satyr talk until the Monster Mythos episode when we talk about satyrs.
Yeah, I need a break.
Yeah, I feel you there. I'm not a big fan of satyrs myself.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not fine.
They were a playable race in 4th edition for a second there.
Neat. Yeah, cool.
I'm sure they will be in this eventually.
Role play that.
Yeah. All right. So do you got any questions for me about the Feywild? Like,
no, I like how it's very natural. I like how pretty I can imagine it and stuff like that. Are there large bodies of water in the Fae?
Oh, yeah, of course. There's going to be huge lakes that the water's as clear as crystal,
Does the Fae ever butt up against the ocean? Is that ever a thing?
You know what? You don't see it a lot, but why wouldn't it? And I imagine that would be a spectacular scene, like the Fey ocean. Oh my gosh, that'd be beautiful.
I was thinking like are there
now
like,
I want to put you guys there.
are there water Fae? Are there like
water nymphs would be definitely existent in the Fae, and like there's not really a monster template for that in the monster manual, but it's really easy to do. I would probably take the Dryad from the monster manual.
Okay.
Change all of its stuff to be more water based rather than plant based. Maybe tack on a couple traits from, say, like the Triton race out of the Volo's Guide, or the Water Genasi race out of the the player's companion to elemental evil.
Okay.
Something along those lines.
Okay.
And then bam, you got yourself a water nymph.
Yeah, I've heard there's a kind of a shortage on like water and air stuff as far as like elemental stuff goes.
Yeah.
So, compared to like earth and fire things.
Yeah, I guess there is. I'm trying to think what's in the monster manual right now. Right when you said Earth and Fire, I thought of like 5 monsters. So yeah, you're probably right.
Oh well, that'd be cool. Yeah, reskinning is an okay thing to do.
Oh yeah,
so.
it's highly encouraged, and I can't wait to talk about that when we do like an encounter building episode or something.
Yeah.
But back to the Feywild. It's a scary, dangerous, beautiful place. And go ahead.
Oh yeah, well, typically in the jungles, but you can imagine it like anywhere. Like not underwater. Would it be ever underwater?
Why not? Like
okay.
I say, why not? Like I mean, it would be. I imagine like super tropical, like Great Barrier Reef, and then turn that up to 11. Why not?
Cool, man. Yeah, I'm always thinking with these crossovers and realities. I'm thinking of like if you drew like the prime material plane as an ellipses, and then maybe on a different axis you draw another ellipses, and that's where the Fey kind of bubbles out, and like it
that's a cool way to look at it.
Takes this area, and like the Shadowfell is another one, and maybe their intersectionality might like cross, and you can do all kinds of weird stuff.
Right.
So what made the Fey? Did something make the Fey?
Well, in like the creation mythos, it's usually something along the lines of what are they called? The primordials, and the gods kind of together created the world, and the primordials were really involved in the actual material part of it all, in like the elements of rock, fire, water, air, and all that.
Right.
And they're the ones that kind of like pushed aside the bits that didn't fit into the image of the prime material realm, and that coalesced into the reflections.
Okay.
But that's so there hasn't been a lot of like hard drawn fact mythos in 5th edition for this stuff. There just really hasn't been. And Chris Perkins, who is like one of the lead guys over at Wizards of the Coast, has basically said when it comes to the Feywild and stuff, go ahead and just use the 4th edition stuff for now. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here when I talk about that creation mythos. When it comes to the creation of the Feywild and the Shadowfell.
Cool.
So yeah. But
4th edition lore always seems pretty cool.
Yeah,
like when we talk about it.
Yeah, I think so. And also, like, I'm super steeped in it because I played 4th edition D&D for like 5 years.
Oh,
so
man.
like I DM'd most of it, so I just know a lot about it.
Cool.
You were talking about like, can the Feywild be underwater? I'm saying hell yeah, it can. You don't usually think desert when you think of Feywild, but like, why the fuck not? It could be just like these like expansive plains of like white sand where like random crystals grow out of the ground and whatnot, and like the sun is shining like hot white, and like the sky is like a crazy blue, and like it could.
That sounds awesome. Yeah,
that still seems Fey-like to me, and like there could be like different types of like Fey type creatures, like maybe like weird Fey type goblins roam the land, and like maybe there are some like big entrances to the Fey Dark where Fomorians come to the surface, maybe hunt down things, and who knows? Like it could be whatever you want. Like really awesome. Like don't feel limited because of what is cliche, and don't feel limited by what is the vanilla D&D lore. Not that there's anything wrong with that lore. That lore is awesome, but you're a dungeon master. It's your job to make the world your own.
Yeah, branch out, make it yours. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else we want to talk about before wrapping it up?
Let's see. I can't like really think of anything off the top of my head right now.
Yeah.
We're doing good.
If we're missing anything, please leave a comment and let us know, and we'll make sure to cover it in future Fey episodes, because I'm sure we're going to do a lot more about these. Let us know what you guys want to hear about. Like that helps me like decide what I need to look up and talk about.
Yeah, that comes along with leaving us feedback and stuff. Every piece of feedback we've gotten, we've implemented, and I want to just do, since we didn't do it in the bump, I wanted to make a quick shout out to my buddy Sandy at work who gave me some real good ideas that we're using in this episode.
Oh, so, yeah.
Thanks a lot, Sandy. Thanks for all your help, man. You're a good guy.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, I think that's it.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one. See you later.
Good one.
Tell your friends.
Bye.
Tell your mom. Peace.
Bye.